and welcome to class. Today we're going to be in the emotional and spiritual quadrants, and our teacher is going to be Matt Brown, author of Every Day a Miracle, and it's coming out in May. Now, when I first researched him, I got an MMA fighter, so I was like, wow, this really is a warrior for the Lord. But it's Matthew Stephen Brown, and is the founding and senior pastor at Sandals Church in Riverside, California. From a small 8-person church plant in 1997, Sandals Church now has 14 physical campuses throughout California. Matt's first book, a book called You, helps you understand the Enneagram from a biblical perspective. Pastor Matt is passionate about the vision of authenticity and raising the next generation of leaders for the local church. He and his wife, Tammy, have 3 children and reside in Riverside, California. Nice. Welcome to class, Matt.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, whenever Matt Brown loses a fight, all my friends mock me on social media. So, yeah.
I have, when people search my name, there are a lot of Michelevrabels I didn't even know. In fact, I have a mutual friend that when I say happy birthday to them on Facebook, her mutual friend, another one, is Michele with 2 L's. So,
okay.
But I don't have any mocking capabilities except my brothers.
Yeah. That's funny.
Okay, well, what I would like to start with, we do want to talk definitely about your book and it coming out, and I love the title and all of that, but I'd like to hear your story, kind of how we got here and how you got to this book.
Yeah, so, my story is I grew up in church. My dad was a small Southern Baptist pastor, and if your audience doesn't know what that is, it's just a kind of a sliver of the Baptist denomination in California, very, very small church, like on Easter, maybe 100 people. Great church, great people, no abuse stories, just wonderful, sweet people. It was a real blessing in my life. But I had an encounter with an abusive leader when I was in high school. I talk about that in the chapter on emotional healing. And it really threw me for a loop. And this guy was violent, scary, manipulative, and basically guilted me into, if you tell anybody, I'm going to get fired, so don't tell anybody what I did. So I didn't tell anybody what he did, because I was a kid. And what I did is I blamed God for that event, and I just I ran from God for a period of about 2 years, and my life became a quick mess. I tell my kids, sin is like a snowball. It starts off small at the top of the mountain, and by the time it gets to the bottom, it's this just huge disaster. And I was just really miserable. I was in the military. I was not happy. Ended up going to a small Christian college, dating a girl. We were a mess. And I don't know if you've heard of Greg Laurie, Harvest Crusade. Yeah. But I went to his church, and it was one of those messages where I felt like he was just talking to me. And, I was sitting next to my girlfriend, and I got up to go forward, and she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to go forward and give my life to Christ." And she literally said, "If you do, we're done." And I was like, okay, I guess we're done. And that was it. I mean, we broke up that day, and she's a beautiful girl. And, but I knew that I needed to change. And so it just sent me on this journey of, okay, what was wrong with my church experience? And ultimately I felt like I couldn't be real. I couldn't tell people, I didn't feel like I could tell people that something happened, that there was something abusive that happened. And I didn't know how to unpack that. And so that's where the vision of Sandals Church comes from being real with ourselves, God, and others. Because oftentimes I feel like in a lot of the wound stories I've heard from Christians in church, it's not necessarily what happened, but it's what they felt like they could or could not share, could or could not tell. And so in the Enneagram, why that was so helpful for me is I'm a 3, and, my sin profile is shame. So everything comes from shame-based. And shame keeps us from being real. And so that's why my first book, a book called You, it's just really my journey in discovering myself and who God made me to be. And then in that, just this miraculous journey of experiencing God do amazing things that people don't think are real, things that I've seen right in front of my eyes, seen God heal people. I saw God bring an 18-month-old boy back from the dead. That's the final chapter in my book. And I know for your listeners, you're like, come on, did that really? I was right there. It was in a hospital OR surgery room. There were medical professionals all around. There was an unbelieving atheist doctor in the room. And when I said in Jesus' name, amen, the boy woke up and he was fine. And so, yeah, so I saw that. So then what do you do with your life? Like when you encounter the miraculous, what do you do? And what I say in the book is miracles don't answer questions. They demand, they don't give answers. They demand deeper questions. Like what is happening here? And, I think a lot of people are stuck with, well, why didn't God heal? But I started to ask, well, why does he heal? Why does he do miracles? And so that turned into this book. And it's a challenging book. I really am proud of my chapter on the complex nature of healing. And I think that as a society, we're in one of two camps. We over spiritualize everything. So you just need prayer, just trust in God. Kind of the anti-vaxxer community, God gave me a immune system, I'm good. And then the other community, right, where trust in science and we have all of this medicine. And what I'm saying is, what if we need both? And so, there are, if you got a chance to read my chapter on emotional healing, there are thousands of people that are in the doctor's office every day, and there's nothing wrong with their physical heart. So they do all these tests. I cannot tell you, Michele, how many people in my church will spend hours upon hours at the hospital getting their heart checked because they have anxiety, and they're convinced the issue is their heart. And it is their heart, but it's not their biological heart. It's their emotional heart. And they have wounds that they've not dealt with. And I look at Jesus from an unconventional way and how he didn't just heal the physical person, but how he heals the whole person. And I point out some things that Jesus does that I think most Christians miss. And I remember there was this is probably a year ago, I was in the lobby, and Sandals is a big church. And so, there's a lot of people, but there's this couple standing there, and it's this wife, husband and wife, and they're with their daughter. And I just said, hey, I always ask people, what brought you to Sandals Church? And the wife says, our doctor recommended Sandals, which that's not something, I expected to hear. So I said, tell me your story. And their daughter has battled mental illness since she was a teenager, and in and out of the hospital, multiple suicide attempts. This is their only child. I mean, you can just imagine. They're heartbroken. They want this girl to thrive, but she has a hard time finding the will to live. And the doctor said, so at one of the leading institutions here in Southern California, the doctor told the mom, we've done everything we know how to do here medically. Maybe this is a spiritual problem. There's a church called Sandals. They might be able to help. Can you just imagine?
You can't, because I've been through all of that myself. And
Yeah. And so, so I just, I thank God for that doctor. So, and we were able to pray over her and help her, and to say, maybe this isn't just a chemistry issue. Maybe this is a spiritual issue. So
that is incredible. And when you were talking about the baby at the hospital and stuff, I mean, I guess that's the point. I think our terminology is what is going awry in current society, is that a miracle by its nature should be unexplainable. Right. You know what I mean? And that we have overused the word awesome or awe. That should be what happens to us when we enter the throne room of God, when we enter his presence and ask him to intercede for us or what have you. So creation, again, another example, those little things, but they're gigantic miracles. And especially in those individual moments, which I'm sure, I have not read your book, I have pre-ordered it, but that it will, that each of the stories are going to be exactly like that. I was, for my story about the abuse and the healing, is I just come from a place where I feel like feelings, where we all sit. When I was 2 years old, I got one of my particularly worst beatings because I had lost a shoe. And I remember, as my dad threw me on the bed by one arm and walked out the door behind me, didn't know the terms evil or good or God or whatever. But I understood right then. I looked at him as he walked out thinking he's bad. I didn't ever, from 2 years on, ever think that the things that happened to me, sexual molestation, just on and on and on, was ever, God not interceding or doing it to me or something I did wrong. Now, mind you, later in life, I made some decisions on my own that did that.
Yeah.
But for me, how the healing looks is that the comforter he promises later when we make that decision for a relationship with Jesus was there for me anyway. He had created my little mind and gave me the ability to survive and thrive out of reasoning what was going on around me. And I think a lot of people probably had that, just didn't see that as they were coming along. And the fact that they're still alive after what they've been through says, hey, you can see the thread here if we take a good look, But I think that sounds awesome. I'm an Enneagram 7.
Okay.
And so therefore, enthusiastic, visionary, it was so funny. I refused to do the test because I think people can manipulate stuff. But when you go in to do that test, you can't manipulate it. I'm like, what the heck is that question for? So I just sat back and went at it and, got the 24-page thing. And the good, the bad, and the ugly were me. I mean, look for the most out of life while avoiding pain. And I'm kind of a stand-up comedian for the mechanisms I put in place when I'm awkward, uncomfortable, or when I feel like I'm in an environment where some of the stuff that happened to me before may be coming up, So, I think each of our ways of going about things, sometimes I'm a science geek, so I don't mind the drill down for like health and nutrition, what I put in and on my body, but I understand that these aren't separate. If you see on my banner, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual are my the places I want to come from for healing with Old School and with my book. And if you're physically phenomenal, I'm 61. A lot of people tell me I don't look that age.
You guessed that,
But that doesn't mean jack if the rest of it is all
No, it's a good word.
So awesome. Well, I can't wait to get it in my hands, but I do have a question, like a couple of questions that I think fit, because the general public and typically non-believers, I know that about 90% of the public has walked some portion of my journey. And that is hard. That's a hard room to stand in front of, especially if they don't feel like they've gotten to speak about it yet. So my question would be, you cover all those miracles in the book, but was the inspiration the miracles themselves, or was the inspiration that's how you started, how you got into the ministry to begin with?
No, it was the miracles themselves. So,
and you were present for each of the ones that you have in your book?
Yes. All of them except Mitch's healing. So Mitch is the 6'8", 19-year-old that was paralyzed, and so he battled being paralyzed for 3 years. So from 19 to 22 years of age, and he had a chronic form of Guillain-Barré syndrome where his body just, for whatever reason, didn't respond to treatment and was told there's no hope. So he was healed. And just so your audience knows, I prayed for him and he was not healed. His chapter is on waiting, when God says wait. And he actually was in a college dorm room with 3 of his friends and just said, guys, would you anoint me with oil and pray? And he was healed, and didn't tell his parents that he stopped taking medicine that night. You can imagine they weren't real thrilled. He confessed to them a month later. He said, hey, I feel like I've been healed. I haven't been taking my medicine. They flipped out, drove him immediately to the research hospital. They did some tests, and the doctor said, I can't tell you it's a miracle, but off the record, he goes, this is a miracle. I've never seen anything like it. And Mitch, so for his experience, I wasn't there, but Mitch is a personal friend. He goes to my church. I've known him since he was a kid. But all the other miracles, I was an eyewitness. And he reached out to me when I was writing the book and said, hey, I want you to consider my story. And so we met and we talked. And but all the other stories I was right there for, including the chapter, both of the suicides I talk about. I was there, and it was awful. And so that's the chapter when God says no. That was heart-wrenching to see 2 young men lose their lives to self-harm. So, let me just say this, Michele. My heart breaks for your story. I mean, to hear anyone say when I was 2, I mean, that just, as a follower of God, and that just breaks my heart. And so I'm so grateful that you've survived that, but it just grieves me to know that that's how you had to grow up. And so I just want to say I'm sorry. And I hope this book that you're writing is healing to people, and it can, help people find hope when the people that were supposed to protect them did actual harm. And so I talk about a girl in my book. I changed her name. I didn't want to use her name. I used the name Mackenzie in my book. She was okay with me using her real name, but I didn't feel good about it. So I call her Mackenzie, and she picked that name. She just said when she was in elementary school, she always wanted to be Mackenzie Dominique. And I was like, okay, that's the name. But just her road to healing, and it's just been so tough and so long. And so I can't wait to read your book and hear about your story. And that's just so fantastic. And I'm just grateful for you. And I just know God's going to do something amazing through your book. So, and I just do want to say my book comes out in March. It's not you that got it wrong. I think that's in the press release. Everyone is saying May. And so it comes out March 5th.
Okay.
So in like a couple weeks.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. Cool. Well, I had a question come up, and then we took a.
I know. Sorry. I felt you shared your story. I just was like, I have to respond to that because, you're 61 now, but you were a little girl, and that breaks my heart for you. And, I have two little girls. Well, they're not little anymore. They're 26 and 27, but I can't imagine them having to go through that. I mean, I love those girls, and, so.
That is that was the burden when the Lord asked me 10 years ago to write it, and I kind of drug my feet, and then I went through a divorce, which was some additional infidelity and abuse. And so at first I was like, no, I'm not a writer. You got it wrong on Moses. You got this wrong.
Yeah.
And he showed me, okay, right now it's for you. Then we move a little farther, and nope, now it needs to start shaping because it's going to work together for good. And I thought in my heart, that is the pinnacle of the healing to me. I can be healed, and I can be functioning and thriving and having a good life. But if everything I went through goes nowhere besides that, I mean, that's awesome. And that's a miracle. But man, when there are that many people out there who have gone through this, and I don't use that same comfort I've received. I was at a conference, and Jen Wilkin her message was on Rahab. And to shorten it up, basically a conviction, a slap in the face, I call it. She did it on Rahab, and she talked about how if the Israelites had been obedient, her deliverance would have come before she had to be a prostitute. It would have come 40 years earlier.
Wow.
But it didn't. And so I was like, oh, my disobedience from 10 years ago has delayed. And so I'm like, okay, now I'm just like, Lord, here I am, send me. Like, let's do this. So I'm sending out queries. We'll see what happens. I don't know if the traditional or self route is where I'm going to go, but I know it's going to go. And I know the Lord already knows how.
Yeah, I'll be praying for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So yes, the way all of this goes out and the way society currently talks about Christians, first of all, and what the word is taking a beating, a relationship with Christ, salvation, miracles, people just are all over the place. So when it comes to both Christians and non-Christians and the yes, no, and wait, what are you hoping they get from Everyday a Miracle?
Yeah. So I hear Christians say all the time, God didn't answer my prayer. And so what I say in the book is every prayer is answered.
Yeah.
And so, and so every prayer is answered with yes, no, or wait. And so what we have to push into as we pray is, what is God's will? Is it God's will to say yes to this? Is it God's will to say no to this, which, again, the chapter when God says no is brutal. Or is it a wait? And am I like the woman who went before the dishonest judge every day that Jesus says, keep coming forward, keep knocking. And how do I figure that out? And then I have a whole chapter on how to figure out God's will. And one of the huge things that I think is so important in that chapter is you don't compromise yourself morally as you're seeking God's will. And so, like, just an example, like if, there's single women in our church, and in California, it's really hard to find a good guy. And so, like, is it God's will for me to be married? And what I tell our church all the time is, God might have one man for you, but Satan has 100. And
Yeah. Yes.
so, so, so don't compromise your moral compass because Satan,
Out of
brought you.
desperation.
Yeah. And so, and that's hard to hear, but and then they're like, well, I thought this was the answer to prayer. And I said, wait a minute, this guy didn't believe in God, doesn't go to church, wanted to have sex before you got married. It's like, explain that to me. And so I think that's a key component, because Jesus, prayed and said, Lord, ultimately not my will, but yours be done. And so we're all in that process. And God does not promise that we don't suffer. God does not promise that little 2-year-olds won't be abused. I mean, that's the part of living in a fallen world. The beauty of living in a world with Jesus is that even little girls like yourself who are abused at 2 can find redemption, like Rahab. I love C.S. Lewis, who said, we can't go back and change our beginning, but we can change our ending. And that's what you're doing. And that's the redemptive purpose. And ultimately in the resurrection, and for your listeners who aren't Christians, our story doesn't end in this life. It ends with this idea of new, real life, not us going to heaven, but God coming to earth. And there is a resurrection. There is a new heaven, a new earth. Michele gets a new body. I get a new body, and all of our tears are wiped away. And we get to begin this new story. And the way that I end my chapter on when God says no is one of the things that changes when Jesus returns is there's no more pain, no more suffering, and no more no's. He takes away all of those no's. And so many of the prayers that we thought God said no to will turn out just to be waits. You have to wait for the resurrection. And so that's the beauty of Christianity, is there's always hope. No matter how much darkness or evil there is in this world, there's always hope, because what Resurrection Sunday says is even after death, there's hope. So,
and a no can be not a misdirection, but a redirection, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I can only imagine, because the relationship I have with Jesus is we've dispensed with subtlety. I sit in my living room. I pray out loud every morning. We talk about the fact that I'm only going to get manna, because if he told me I'm divorced and I would like to date, if he told me the man he had for me was at the Starbucks, I'd be over there trying to work it out. Is it him? Is it him? Is it him? So, he knows we'll muck it up if he gives us too far down the road. I'm good with enough light, as Stormy O'Mardian says, for the step I'm on.
That's good.
Well, I like to end every podcast with what I call someone's nugget. Some of us who are older now, you're younger than me, but some of us who are older have probably multiple ones. But the one thing that you wish you had known earlier, or that someone had told you earlier.
Yeah, and that's that God is working even when I don't see it or feel it. And, as I reflect back on my life, and, I'm 10 years younger than you, I just look back at some of the darkest times where I couldn't feel God at all. And now as I reflect and look back, all I see is God working in that process, working in my darkness, working in my struggle. And what I try to remind myself is, when I don't feel him in my current issues, he's more present than I know. And so that's just the nugget, is, God is always there. Chapter 2 in my book is the miracle of God's presence. So in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus, we call him Jesus, but Matthew gives him the name Emmanuel.
Right.
Which
God with us.
God with us. And that is the beauty of our faith, is that he is with us and he will never not be with us. And so I'm just so grateful for that. So that's the nugget. And I have to remind myself of that constantly, because it's easier to reflect than it is to be in the present. So
I used to tell people the Truth Project when what is his name? Dell says, if we believe that what we believe is really real, well, 100% of the God of the universe is in us if we've had that relationship with Jesus, that salvation experience. So if what truly would be impossible, or when he gives us a no in a given day, why are we not embracing that? Because that's what we're drawing on, as opposed to fighting against it and thinking he doesn't love us or he's not here when that happens. So I think it's an awesome nugget. I try to remind myself daily. My friends know me as the choose joy woman, which is not just because I'm a 7, but I think as a result of being a 7.
Amen. Yeah.
Well, sir, this has been a pleasure meeting you, and I can't wait to get the book. I want to thank you for coming. And I want to thank everybody for coming to class. If you would like to connect with Matt, get his book, maybe check out his church if you're in California, then I will have all the links in the show notes. And it comes out March 5th.
So yeah, pretty quick. Yeah.
We will be releasing this episode as close to that as we can. And this would be awesome. So I want to thank you all for coming to class. Please go watch on your favorite platform, rate, review, download, subscribe. And I want to thank you for coming to class, and class dismissed.